It's July 2017 and Elizabeth Holmes is being deposed as authorities are trying to figure out if there were any violations of federal security law in her running of Theranos. If you're unfamiliar with the story, it will obviously all unfold over the course of this video, but the Cliff Notes version is that Elizabeth Holmes claimed to have invented a device whereby, with a single drop of blood, hundreds of tests could be carried out in order to potentially diagnose a patient. Now, generally, if you've had your blood taken, you would know that they need a vial, several vials, often, for this kind of testing. So this invention of Elizabeth's would have been a game changer. The thing is, there were problems, and that's all I'm going to say for now, but the problems led to her being apprehended and eventually sentenced for fraud-type crimes connected to this so-called miracle device of hers. This is why she's being deposed. The show unfolds in chronological order, but every now and then they'll just show her at different points in her deposition and the kind of questions that she was being asked. Amanda Seyfried is a dead ringer for Holmes, especially in these deposition scenes. Before we get into how it all started, we see her in one of her interviews with a reporter at the height of her popularity. She was showing the reporter around the lab, telling the reporter that they just needed a drop of blood to run hundreds of tests. We finally go back to her childhood in 1995. She's coming last in track at school. Everyone is long done, but Elizabeth keeps going, determined to finish. This tells us that, as she herself says, she's mission-oriented. Elizabeth comes home from school one day to the news that her dad has lost his job. The company, Enron, was bankrupt and everyone was let go. Elizabeth's father considers asking a family friend for financial help, but Elizabeth is really proud and she tells them not to. They don't need them. She's certain that they'll somehow make this work, even though there aren't many other options, and this is kind of a running theme for her. Anyway, they end up going to the friend's home for dinner, where we find out that Elizabeth got early acceptance into Stanford. She plans on studying biomedical engineering, inventing a product, and starting a company. I don't know if she's a little too old to be called precocious at this point, but the adults are a little taken aback by her intensity. It's fascinating because it seems as though she's desperate to prove herself, but at the same time, she's pretty self-assured and she feels like she's the smartest one in the room. And her father's friend, Frank Gallagher from Shameless, says as much. Elizabeth has a poster of Steve Jobs on her wall, her hero obviously. She also tells her mother in a very matter-of-fact way that she plans on becoming sexually active. She'd like to do it before she goes to uni. Obviously, there's this idea that it's just something that needs to be done for some reason. She doesn't show much of an interest in boys or girls in a sexual way. None at all, really. So Elizabeth goes to Beijing on an immersion program and she's pretty committed to learning Mandarin. She almost scolds a group of girls that they should be speaking Mandarin and not English. It's on this trip that she meets Sunny and she likes that he takes the program seriously. Okay, I wouldn't know because I don't speak Mandarin, but it sounds really impressive when Amanda does it. Anyway, since Elizabeth doesn't really fit in with her peers, she ends up forming a close friendship with Sunny and she shares with him her dream of helping people and becoming a billionaire. Later on, she's a student at Stanford and she impresses one of the graduate professors by telling him the flaw in one of his experiments, and she's allowed into the graduate group because of this, even though she's just a freshman. She still talks to Sunny over the phone regularly, by the way. In her sophomore year, she shows one of her professors her design for a device, a patch that attaches to a patient's arm and automatically administers the drugs, like antibiotics, and can give a diagnosis. Her professor encourages her to see another professor, Dr. Gardner, who very quickly tells Elizabeth that her device won't work for a multitude of technical reasons, but also because people who are sick would likely not really want this kind of device. At one point, Elizabeth is depressed in bed and we overhear some girls gossiping that she was SA'd at a party and she reported it, but Stanford didn't take the case any further. She also tells Sunny to stop calling her, she's only 19. Then one day, the idea of her device kind of hits her and she gets to work. In March 2004, she shows her professor the blueprint for her device, a box which can somehow test your blood in your own home, needing only a drop of blood. She tells her parents that she's dropping out of Stanford and she asks them if they can invest her tuition money in her company. They already have a space and they're renting and everything. Towards the end of the episode, she almost gets hit by a stray bullet. She calls Sonny then and seeks his comfort, and he tells her that he'll protect her. They embrace and start making out. In episode 2, it's 2006, and they're trying to develop the prototype for this device. There's excitement and possibility and hope in the air, and Elizabeth is talking about changing the world with this machine. So they test the machine and it doesn't work. Elizabeth is hemorrhaging money at this point, and she needs more investors. She tries and goes around giving presentations, but nobody's biting. Her being a dropout with no actual medical or engineering credentials is causing problems. One of her potential investors points out that she just has a high school diploma, so how is she even able to understand the complexity of this device or the processes involved? One of her main chemists, Ian, works at the lab because he's recently had cancer and he has had experience with being poked and prodded, so he believes in this project and her vision at first. Elizabeth and Sonny are lovers, by the way, secret lovers. One of the potential investors, Don, comes by the office, but of course Elizabeth has to stall. He can't really see anything. The engineer's on panic mode, trying to come up with something to show him. They aren't ready, and she admits that to Don, and he's about to walk away, but she manages to pique his interest with a little inspiring speech about changing the world. Elizabeth ends up on another potential investor's boat. Since Don is in, I guess word is out, and this could be something. This guy says that he's in if she gets her prototype and a deal with Novartis, a pharma company. He psychs her up and tells her that all she needs to do is get the money. The engineers have a kind of breakthrough and they all celebrate with Elizabeth. At this point, everything is still kind of on the up and up, but when they go to Switzerland to give their big demonstration, the machine suddenly stops working. They stay up all night prior to the demo and try everything possible to get it to work, but they're unsuccessful. Rakesh, one of the engineers, tells Elizabeth then that they should tell their prospective audience that they'll be pitching to that they don't have a demo. It's kind of over at this point and there isn't much they can do. But Elizabeth says that the machine did work at one point. They still have the readings from when it worked, so she's going to bluff. She'll do the demonstration using the previous readings and pretend that the machine is still working. This is just a detail, a technicality though, because she says it did work. This is still fraud though. Anyway, the presentation in Basel goes really well. They secure the funding, but yeah, they're going to need to get this device to work for real now. Meanwhile, back at the office, Ian tells Edmund that Elizabeth put her name down for their patent applications on their inventions, even though Elizabeth herself didn't really contribute in a scientifically significant way. At the end of the episode, Elizabeth tells Sonny that they faked the demo. And Edmund finds out and confronts Rakesh about it. Rakesh is all in though, reluctantly, but he's still all in. And Elizabeth tells Sonny that she loves him. In episode 3, it's June 2007, and Amanda brings in Anna, a lady who worked on the iPhone design for Apple, and she encourages Elizabeth to improve the way she presents herself to the board so that they can take her seriously. At this point, Elizabeth doesn't really care. She feels she doesn't have the time to decide what she's going to wear every day. It's kind of frivolous to her, so she comes to the office in scruffy jeans and tank tops. She does look unprofessional and scruffy, but she still kind of is seen as the wonderkind, I guess, so to a certain extent it doesn't really matter. By the way, the family friend has been kind of keeping tabs on Elizabeth's company, and he invented a mechanism that would alert doctors when a patient shows an abnormal blood test result. Elizabeth then would have to license this invention of his in order to move forward with her own. Things are kind of looking up because they have money and they're building a new office space right now, but they have lost out on a contract with Novartis. So should they be building this new office space based on the projected revenue from that deal if it's fallen through? Probably not. Elizabeth then tells a very handsome and concerned looking finance board member, Avi, that they're in talks with Pfizer. She tells them that they're ready to do the Pfizer trial on actual human patients. There was a scene where Edmund and Rakesh admitted to each other that they were nowhere near ready to test on human patients though. So this is a lie. It's getting really stressful at this point that I have no idea how she got from here to the cover of Forbes. There's several obvious points in the story where it should have ended for her, but she's pretty scrappy and she keeps on surviving. She's not well though. She's getting paranoid about secrets coming out, and because there are several secrets and lies at this point, she hires security and suddenly people aren't allowed to move freely around the office building anymore. Anyway, now it's time for the Pfizer trial. So Elizabeth and Edmund head off to Nashville to a cancer treatment center, an oncology clinic. The patients are all sitting there getting their treatment, and Elizabeth and Edmund are there with their shady machine to take their blood. Up until this point, everything had been theoretical. They were building something in a lab and and even the demo to the money people, they weren't exactly risking anyone's life at that point. And I don't know, if I was in Edmund's position, I would have thought that the guards and regulations would have prevented this from even getting to the point where they're going to Nashville, but here they are. This is too much for Edmund, who feels bad about looking at actual patients in the face and essentially lying to them. Elizabeth justifies it by saying that this is a trial. The patients know that they're participating in a trial. She tells him to get back in there and finish the job, basically. Handsome finance board guy Ivy goes to Don with the information and his concerns. Don fires him from the board, dismissing his concerns because he trusts Elizabeth, but Ivy insists that Elizabeth is lying and that Don should at least start asking some questions. Meanwhile, back at the office, Elizabeth hires a new engineer, Brendan, to make a completely different machine. Not really a new invention, just repurposing everything from another machine that already exists. Sonny tells her that evening then that he knows, based on what he's seen, you see he went to the office earlier on the day to check up on things. He says he estimates that she's 10 years behind on what she promised on this deliverable. She's going to have to come up with something to tell the board at some point. They don't have 10 years. He tells her that what he saw when he went to the office is that nobody respects her, and they talk behind her back. They have a fight then, and he almost gets physically aggressive with her. Well, actually he does, but he stops short of actually hitting her. He spills green juice all over her, and he really scares her with his outburst. Edmund is being let go, so he packs his boxes, and a couple of security guards are escorting him out. He looks a little bit relieved at one point. Elizabeth is celebrating the preliminary success of Brendan's invention, which is called the Edison. Anna, meanwhile, finds out that Elizabeth tested her device on actual patients, and Anna hasn't even seen the device yet. She knows it doesn't work, and she thinks this is an egregious ethical violation, and she quits on the spot. Don arrives at the office then and confronts Elizabeth about lying to him. He tells her that he's going to call a meeting to have her stripped of her position as CEO. She's clearly not able to steer this ship. Honestly, if I were Elizabeth at this point, I'd be relieved. What normal person would still be able to keep this charade going? So the board convenes and they announce to her that they're stripping her of her CEO status based on the results of the trial in Nashville. Pfizer is out and the entire design team has quit. Elizabeth gets emotional and she admits that she's in over her head. She tells them then that she reached out to somebody who would come on board as COO to help her. He would like to invest $20 million in the company, but only if she stays on as CEO. She also floats her idea about forgetting about pharma companies and targeting retail spaces. After the fact, Elizabeth tells Sonny that she needs $20 million and he will be COO. At the end of the episode, we see that Rakesh is at Edmund's home telling him that he quit. Elizabeth also debuts her new look and it's not over for her yet. She also sues the family friend. Well, she sent someone to serve him papers. In March 2010, Elizabeth is presenting at Walgreens HQ. Alan Rock's character was a physician and he's in that meeting. This is who Elizabeth is mainly trying to sell to. She's trying to sell the idea of wellness centers in Walgreens, but they don't have FDA approval yet at this point. Alan Rock, his name is Dr. J, seems enthusiastic about this project though. Ian expresses his concern to Sonny about the changing workplace culture. Elizabeth seems to be preoccupied with security and money, and Ian also talks to his wife about his concerns. Kevin Hunter is there with the Walgreens group and he's the man who's meant to inspect the labs, and Elizabeth is nervous and it shows. Kevin finds everything suspicious. Elizabeth then tells Dr. J that Kevin, the guy there who should be inspecting the labs, used to work at Quest Diagnostics. Her security ran a background check on him. They have evidence that Quest might be trying to duplicate Theranos' tech, so they can't let him see the labs. At one point, Sonny even accompanies Kevin to the bathroom under the guise of showing him the way, but it's clearly suspicious. Ian manages to get his hands on the Walgreens pitch folder, the so-called Project Beta, another secret project with a janky machine that isn't actually made by Theranos engineers. The Walgreens team agree that without seeing the labs, they won't have a deal. Elizabeth says that they can't show them the labs until they have a deal. Then Ian goes to Elizabeth's professor, who took her into his graduate class back when she was a freshman. He later came onto the project as a consultant. Ian tells Channing, this professor, that Elizabeth plans to put the machine in stores. Channing already knows since he's on the board. He doesn't see the problem. Ian tells them that the machine is actually years away from being ready. Elizabeth and Sonny take the Walgreens group out for a fancy meal and it's tense negotiations. allegations. Elizabeth holds her own against them. She says that they can see the lab tomorrow morning. Ian and Elizabeth end up having a chat then because after he went to Channing came back to Elizabeth. Ian tells her in no uncertain terms that they cannot use the machines on humans. He tells her that she doesn't actually understand the science or the implications of what she's doing. Elizabeth fires Ian and tells him that he doesn't see the vision. By the way, it's against company protocol to talk to anybody outside of your department at Theranos, so workers are getting antsy. It's a very tense environment. Sunny calls Ian the next day saying that he can have his job back. Ian comes back to the office to see that he's been given a desk in an open plan office. He doesn't have a lab downstairs, so he's been demoted from head chemist, if he even is still a chemist. In September 2010, Elizabeth lies to George Schultz and tells him that Safeway and Walgreens are on board, and having him, Schultz, on board would be a game changer. She flatters his ego, telling him he's a force of nature. Walgreens and Theranos are celebrating their partnership, and Kevin, the lab guy, still hasn't been able to see the labs. In episode 5, it's 2013, and the Walgreens team is getting impatient. It's been 3 years at this point. They even have a prototype for their wellness center, but they don't know how big the machine is because they still haven't seen the Theranos labs or the Theranos machine, and they need an answer. They eventually give Elizabeth 6 months to get this machine and the labs ready. She assures them that they will be ready. It's not going well over at Theranos though. The machines are literally smoking and exploding. Elizabeth's old neighborhood friend of the family sees that Ian's name is on all of the patents, and Ian gets called in to testify about those patents. Ian can't tell the truth though, because then he'd be violating his NDA and he could get sued, and he can't lie because then he'd perjure himself. The issue is that even though Elizabeth's name is on all of the patents, she didn't do any of the scientific work. So she lied on the patent applications. Elizabeth's brother works at Theranos now. Everyone is trying to get hold of Elizabeth, but she's kind of running away from everybody at this point. She's stalling and she goes off to meet with her lawyer. Then we meet Tyler, grandson of George Schultz, one of Elizabeth's biggest supporters at this point, and he's going to start working at Theranos. Sunny then comes up with a plan that they practically need to steal Siemens machines, so steal another company's tech, because they're hemorrhaging money at this point. He asks Elizabeth, what if they just shut the company? She's still in denial though. She wants to keep going. Elizabeth's parents are also very proud of her, and they tell her friends that even Henry Kissinger is a donor. So when she confides in her mother and tells her and asks her, what if she just stops the company, and what if it's just not who she is? Her mother tells her that she can't quit. She'll save so many lives, and she's proud of her. Sunny and Elizabeth decide that they'll just use the Siemens machines as phase 1, and Sunny shows her how he's already stripped the machines to somehow make it work. Ian, who has been really struggling with the stress of potentially having to testify or get a doctor's note admitting that he's unwell, as in he's drinking too much, takes his own life. Minutes after the news comes in, the in-house lawyer does say that they need to get his laptop back. So Tyler's working at Theranos, and when he arrives on his first day, one of the engineers is quitting and he warns Tyler to get out. Elizabeth is giving a presentation meanwhile, showing the company logo in a very guru-like way. They're launching in Walgreens in 48 hours. Richard then calls Elizabeth's Stanford professor and asks about her, and she tells Richard that Elizabeth's a fraud. She's always been a fraud. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is cutting ribbons with giant scissors and she's celebrating with Walgreens. In episode 6, we see the famous portrait of Elizabeth in her black polo neck and the red lipstick. It's October 2013 and Theranos is in business, taking blood from patients. Real patients. Richard then calls a reporter from the Wall Street Journal and he tells him that Theranos is all a lie. We also meet a new employee then, Erica, and see her onboarding where she has to sign this form saying that she can't use certain words when talking about Theranos. Words like research, for example. She gets to work and she senses right away that something's off, and Tyler offers her tape for her computer so that she's not surveilled during work. During a conference at Stanford, Elizabeth has a run-in with her old professor, Professor Gardner, who talks to Richard afterwards. The reporter had told Richard that in order to move forward with the story, he needs a source. They go then to see Ian's widow, who tells them that she wants to bring the company to the ground. At Theranos, Erica is asked to cherry-pick data. She's asked to delete the outliers on some tests, which is shady and unethical, and she refuses to do it. Tyler then talks to Elizabeth about his concerns. The mismanagement in the lab means that they will be reporting accuracy of 95%
for the tests when the real number is actually a lot lower. Elizabeth tells Tyler that it was really brave of him to have come forward, and when Tyler says we, Elizabeth asks who the we is that he's referring to, and he says it's Erica. Soon after, Erica is reassigned and she isn't allowed to share what she's working on with anyone. She also catches a glimpse of employees diluting blood samples in the lab. Ian's widow explained to the journalist that Elizabeth did not invent anything, even though her name is on all the patents. And if Ian had testified, it would have invalidated Theranos' patents. The journalist still needs another source though, someone with first-hand knowledge, but everyone who works at Theranos or worked there signs an NDA, so most people with that knowledge are afraid of getting sued if they speak out. Erica runs some tests on a patient sample, and she calls the help desk and tells them that the machines aren't running quality control checks, so they can't give the patient these results. The voice on the other end of the line says that they can give the patient the data, and someone comes in, overrides the error on the machine, and leaves. All of this implies that the patient is going to be given results regardless of the potential inaccuracies, and also regardless of the lack of QA. Erica goes looking around and she peels back a sticker from one of the Theranos machines, and she sees that behind it, it's actually a Siemens machine. She tells Tyler, and even though he believes her because he also knows that something is up, he's still really taken aback by the idea that Elizabeth could possibly know and approve of what's happening in the labs. Sonny, by the way, is getting impatient, and he also wants public recognition as Elizabeth's boyfriend. At a party, Tyler wants to talk to his grandpa about what he knows or suspects, but Elizabeth walks in before he can say anything. Tyler then asks Elizabeth about the use of Siemens machines, and she says that he doesn't know what he's talking about. He then goes to Erica and they talk about it. They send an email to Elizabeth, get called into Sonny's office for a talking to, and Tyler is promptly fired. Erica has more to lose, so Tyler decides to take on most of the risk in their operation. Erica won't lose her job, but Sonny threatens her and he tells her that she will never work in this town or in the industry again if she carries on snooping and reporting on the shadiness and crimes in the labs, basically. Erica quickly calls George Schultz to tell him that Tyler doesn't understand the complexity of what's happening, and George believes her. He believes in Theranos and Elizabeth's lie that the doubters just don't understand. George does not believe that Elizabeth and Theranos are lying to regulators. Then another Theranos employee starts to feel guilty. He can't keep quiet about what's been happening at the company. He's the one who hired Erica, so he knows where a lot of the bodies are buried, so to speak. Anyway, he decides to talk to Richard. The guy says that he took an oath as a physician, and this doesn't sit well with him, so he's willing to spill. At the end of the episode, Erica and Tyler decide to call the journalist as well. In episode 7, by 2015, Elizabeth is a media darling, and she has an audience with people like Bill Clinton and Joe Biden. At this point, the journalist Richard has doctors on the record saying that Theranos gave some of their patients incorrect results, which potentially did put their lives at risk. The physician from the end of last episode, his name is Mark, is copying something onto a USB and he runs out of the building. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is doing interviews and rubbing shoulders with famous people as though the walls are not closing in. Tyler goes over to his grandpa and the Theranos lawyer is there, and the initial agreement is to have him sign another NDA, but the lawyer also has a restraining order and wants to sue him, so his grandpa shuts it down. This turns out to be pretty tense, with Theranos and their legal representation basically threatening Tyler. David tells Elizabeth then that the article that's coming out about Theranos and the possible lies is imminent. It's not going away. She has to tell him everything that she has been hiding. So the Theranos lawyers meet with the editorial team at the Wall Street Journal. You see, the Wall Street Journal did send Theranos questions and an opportunity for them to respond to these allegations. This meeting goes terribly for Theranos. The story is going to be published. Elizabeth is still somehow kind of winning though. She's joining the Harvard Medical School Board and she's in major denial. George at this point tries to give her an off-ramp, asks her if she's sure she has the right people around her. Is she sure that Sonny is good for her? Later at the house, things aren't going well for the couple. At one point, Sonny says in a tone that she was copied in all of the emails, implying to Elizabeth that she's in on all of it, all of the dirty business. Elizabeth responds that as CEO, she doesn't read her emails, so she seems to think that this gives her plausible deniability. She also bumps into her old professor at the medical board function at Stanford, and the old professor can't believe that Elizabeth has made it this far because she knows that Elizabeth is a fraud. Anyway, the article comes out and Elizabeth is still fighting. In the final episode, episode 8, we start with another deposition scene and it shows Elizabeth always flustered. She's completely the opposite of the Elizabeth who ran Theranos, who would never let people see her being unprepared or uncertain. I suppose in this case, she had to kind of infantilize herself almost, make herself seem forgetful so that there is some doubt as to how far the culpability goes with her. We go back to October 2016 then. The article has just dropped and both Elizabeth and Sunny are in full damage control mode, calling all of their supporters and donors, trying to get them to keep the faith. Elizabeth assures them that it's just people who don't like seeing a woman succeed and the attack is misogynistic. She is going to fix this issue. A lot of people are still on her side after this. Nobody even dropped off the board because of the article, so it's not over yet. Well, not quite. The journalist's editor then tells him to get a story from Tyler Schultz, a first-hand account, because if Schultz is involved in the story, that name, as in George Schultz by extension, the story will have a bigger impact. One evening, Elizabeth catches Sunny talking on the phone about his possible exposure. She realizes then that he's likely talking to a lawyer and he's looking to protect himself without her. Erica and Tyler decide to write a letter to some medical regulatory agency. It seems like mostly Erica's idea though. Because the article didn't quite have the impact and people's lives continue to be at risk if Theranos remains operational, they feel they have to do this. Erica also decides that she no longer wants to be anonymous. She wants people to know that she's the one speaking out, consequences be damned. Tyler goes to his grandpa then and tells him that he was the one who spoke to the reporter. He also says now that he's going to go on the record, and George says that this means that the story will become about him, so he's very unhappy. George is still not seeing it, and Tyler asks him to step forward as the first board member against Theranos and Elizabeth, but George kicks Tyler out of his home. Their relationship for now is ruined because of this. Someone from the Medicaid Services, the regulatory body that Erica and Tyler wrote the letter to, arrives at Theranos HQ and Elizabeth and Sunny are panicking. The in-house lawyer says that Elizabeth can't do it. She can't go out and speak to him. She needs to be protected, so Sunny has to do it. Sunny tries to sweet talk the guy, tries to give a presentation, but the regulatory guy is not biting. He's not leaving until he finishes his inspection of the facilities and writes his report. We see the eventual report then, that Theranos will be shut down because of several issues found at the lab that could impact patient safety and data integrity. I mean, they have impacted those things. Sunny and Elizabeth finally come out with it then. He admits that he got a lawyer, and she plays dumb. She asks him what he did. Did he do anything that she didn't know about? She's trying to make him her patsy, basically. She expresses sorrow at him having to leave the company. She just says this, by the way. He hasn't said anything about leaving, but she's already laying the groundwork for him to be the poison apple at the company. He then reminds her of the texts that they sent to each other throughout their relationship, and she senses that he might be threatening her. The thing is, though, Sunny and Elizabeth started talking to each other when she was barely 18, and even though the show shows us that they had a platonic relationship until she was of consenting age, it's still terrible optics though, and kind of weird and bad in general, because 40-year-old men shouldn't be developing close friendships with teenage girls. They then realize that it's a bit of a mutually assured destruction situation, so they decide to fight this together. Erica gets a call from the journalist to tell her that her letter she wrote saved people's lives, and he thanks her. Sunny wakes up to realize that Elizabeth has held a board meeting and she told everyone that he decided to step down when he'd done no such thing. She lies also in her eventual deposition that the breakup was mutual, but we see that it was an ugly breakup. He's begging her to stay, also half threatening her. She emotionlessly walks out. Around this time, after the fallout from the lab report resulting in Theranos being shut down, Elizabeth is getting ready for an interview and her parents and lawyers are there to support her. The messaging is that she apologizes for her oversight and basically she should subtly put it all onto Sunny, assure the public that he's out of the company and she's working to fix this issue, a minor setback, but that she takes it seriously. The dynamic between Elizabeth and her parents has always been interesting, but especially now that, or since she's become this tech CEO, they're kind of stage parents, proud of her, but they also seem to enjoy the benefits of being the parents of Elizabeth Holmes a little bit too much. They enjoy being in the upper echelons of that world. Elizabeth really struggles in the interview. She's unable to really convey that she understands the severity of her situation, and she takes zero accountability. The other shoe begins to drop even for hard believers like George Schultz. George Schultz then goes to see the journalist and tells him that he blames him for tearing his family apart, but that it's also his own fault for doing this. He wants to acknowledge Tyler's integrity, and he offers the paper a public statement doing so, and this should be published. We fast forward some time later, and Elizabeth is struggling financially, but as usual, she's in denial. Her lawyer quit because Elizabeth couldn't pay her any longer. Elizabeth cheerfully plays with her dog and gushes about her new boyfriend, And the lawyer is all of us at this point when she asks, do you realize how much trouble you're in or what you did? Elizabeth tells the lawyer that she just wanted to help people and she failed. Failure isn't a crime. She has a mini meltdown after running out of the building, but as soon as her Uber driver arrives, she's not driving a Tesla at this point anymore. She has to take Uber. She puts on her good face again. She's capable, formidable Elizabeth, unbothered. We're told then that in 2018, she and her new boyfriend went to the Burning Man festival together, and we get some interesting and shocking bits of information about the effects of this debacle. $700 million of investor money was lost and 800 people lost their jobs. And we're told that between 2013 and 2016, 7.8 million patients in Arizona got sent test results, and among them, a false HIV positive, a false cancer diagnosis, and a mistaken indication of miscarriage. As for what happened to Erica, she testified at Holmes's trial and she started an ethics entrepreneur startup. George, prior to his passing, did tell Tyler that he did the right thing. Elizabeth also became a mother in 2021, and she remains free for now while she awaits sentencing where she could face up to 20 years in prison. Anyway, that was season 1 of the Dropout. Feel free to share your thoughts, and thank you for watching.